Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. In this video, we will talk about two characteristics that don't have opposites. And they are Inhiraf and Tafashy. Bismillah, let's get into the details. In terms of learning outcomes and what you should be able to get out from this video, by the end of it, you should be able to explain what Inhiraf is and which letters it applies to. And by the end of this video, you should be able to explain what Tafashy means and which letter it applies to. First, let's talk about Inhiraf. Inhiraf in Arabic means drifting or deviation. Drifting or deviation. And it applies to two letters in Arabic. So this is quite simple. It applies to the Ra and the Lam. Let's start with the Lam. So when we say the deviation here is the deviation of the sound. The sound deviates around the tip. So you know how the tip of the tongue is touching? So the sound deviates on the right and on the left. So you say the sound avoids that tip, goes around the right and left of that tip of the tongue. So that's the drifting or deviation. And the opposite happens with the Ra. So the deviation with the Ra. Now if you remember the Ra, when we looked at the Ra, we said there's a gap in the middle of the tongue where the sound can go through. Now with the Ra, the sound deviates from the outside through the middle and outwards. So that's the drifting. So it's drifting or deviation of the sound when we say al and ar, or the lam and the ra. And that's just characteristics of these two letters in terms of how the sound travels within the mouth and avoids certain objects on its way. Let's look at some images. So here's the lam, and as we said, the sound drifts around that tip of the tongue and outwards. And the opposite is the ra, where the drifting is towards the middle of the tongue, where there's that little gap. The drifting happens towards the middle of the tongue. And that's it for the Inhiraf, for the lam and the ra. Moving on to the second characteristic, which is Tafashy. And the characteristic of Tafashy means spreading. And it only applies to the letter Sheen. So when we say ash, ash, the sound of the Sheen spreads within the mouth. And that's just a characteristic for the letter Sheen. So we say ashtata, ashtata. So when we pronounce Sheen correctly, the sound spreads within the mouth. Ashtata. It starts from the makhraj, from the middle of the tongue with the middle of the upper palate and outwards. Ashtata. And once again, the Tafashy, the characteristic of Tafashy only applies to the Sheen. That's it for these two simple characteristics. Tafashy applies to Sheen and Inhiraf applies to Lam and the Ra. There's not much more to it. We'll see you in the next video. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.